Jayden Daniels is the top Commanders player in 2025, according to insiders and myself. But after that, things differ just a little bit right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Commanders, where we watch the film, break down the data, and call it like we see it. I'm your host, David Harrison, and this is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Not only am I here with you 5 days a week, but I'm also covering your Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com and WUSA9.com. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today. Whether you're an everydayer or you're just coming through for the first time, I appreciate you. But to the everydayers, a special thank you to you for coming through for every single episode. Anybody out there, if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's episode. If this is your first time, welcome. Thank you for finding us. I hope you stick around, hope you like it, and I hope you come back again soon. On today's episode, we're going to dig into where fans and I don't see eye to eye on the top Washington Commanders for 2025. Before that, I'm going to share my personal top 10 picks, including one key player that's missing from the insider voted list. And we're going to get started with that insider list, top 10, breaking down what it reveals about the Commanders and who the fans trust the most heading into the new season. Of course, all led by quarterback Jayden Daniels. So first up, we're going to break down the insider voted top 10 Commanders heading into the 2025 season. This is a poll that I sent to them late last week, gave it through the weekend to get the votes in, got a good amount of responses. And what their choice to say about the team's biggest leaders, only one player making it to the top 10 with 100% of the votes, unsurprisingly getting 100% of the votes. That, of course, being quarterback Jayden Daniels. I'm going to be honest, I thought some of these other players would get 100% of the votes, but listen, there's 90 guys on the roster. Only 10 of them can make your list, your individual list. So I suppose having people left off the list here and there is going to happen. Two players tied for second place that went over 90% but didn't hit 100%. Terry McLaurin and Frankie Louvu. Fourth place came in Laramie Tunsil, followed by Mikey Sainristil and Bobby Wagner, both tied for fifth place. Deebo Samuel, the new wide receiver coming over from the San Francisco 49ers, finished seventh. Tight end Zach Ertz and center Tyler Biadasz, both tied for eighth. And we also had a tie at 10th place for offensive lineman guard Sam Cosmi and cornerback Marshawn Lattimore. So that was the insider voted top 10. Quite a good spread. Some new players, some veteran players, some older, some younger. No rookies, which I think is fair because rookies, even though guys like Trey Amos are impressing during OTAs and all that stuff, haven't done anything in pads quite yet. So outside of like a starting quarterback that people are just really excited for before his rookie season, I wouldn't necessarily expect to see any rookies on this list. So I'm very happy that was exactly what happened here as we've gone through this list. Now, fans clearly from this list, just looking at the top order of it, respect leadership, but leadership combined with playmaker dynamic, right? Jayden Daniels obviously has that playmaker dynamic in him. We saw him make several plays with his arms, with his legs, all those things. But also we saw that leadership ability in him really kind of grow as the season went on. From the beginning of the year, where he was really just kind of trying to figure things out, make plays where he could with his athleticism and his arm. But then as we got later into the season, especially coming out of that 3-game losing streak, I think you really saw Jayden take a step forward as a leader and just kind of put the team on his back at certain moments during the end run there of the regular season. I think that's where a lot of these votes end up coming for. That's where a lot of excitement, I should say, coming into his second season comes from. Terry McLaurin, guy who's been around for quite a while, obviously been through the worst that this franchise has to offer, has always had a smile on his face, has always been someone who's willing to stand up for the franchise and do all those things. Not a surprise that he's up there. Certainly cemented himself as wide receiver number one on this team. Frankie Louvu, a little bit of a leadership role there, right? Bobby Wagner obviously is the king in the linebacker room, but Frankie Louvu had his own little flair of leadership. We saw the videos, we saw the motivational efforts by him, but then also the splash plays and things that were made throughout the season. But they do still, Commanders fans, insiders specifically, value leadership, right? Bobby Wagner, top 5. Did Bobby Wagner make a ton of splash plays? Not as many as like Frankie Louvu. Didn't lead the team in sacks or anything like that, but certainly his impact felt on the field We heard Joe Witt Jr. talk multiple times during the 2024 season about Bobby setting the defense, sometimes during no huddle situations, making plays before Joe could even get the call through the headset and making the right play at that. Zach Ertz, the tight end, not only did he have a resurgent year on the field, but again, showing that value as a veteran leader on the field. Tyler Biadasz, the center, who makes all the calls, sets all the protections for the offense when he's out there. PFF top third in NFL centers graded out in 2024. And then Sam Cosmi. Sam Cosmi is a guy also tied here for number 10 on the insider voted list. You like the leadership ability of him, kind of the heart. Like if Tyler Biadasz is the brains of the offensive line, Sam Cosmi is the heart of the offensive line. So certainly that's going to be a big miss this year, at least for part of it. We'll see how long if he comes back in 2025. Terry McLaurin being top 2, though, explains why there's also so much attention being spent to his current contract situation. So, of course, Terry missing the final day of voluntary workouts before OTAs began, missing all of the OTAs. We'll see if he shows up for mandatory minicamp here in the coming week. Don't expect him to unless there's a deal done, right? If there's a deal done, then obviously he's going to be there. But we don't get word of a contract either Monday or Tuesday morning. I would not expect Terry to be at the mandatory minicamp Tuesday when that whole thing gets kicked off. But you see from the insiders, you see from the Commanders fans, clear wide receiver number 1, right? Like without a doubt, even though Deebo Samuel comes over, nobody's thinking there's a threat here. There's a possibility that Terry gets unseated as that top target, all those things. A leader on the team, been a team captain since early on in his career. Now last year, Dan Quinn opting to not go with the year-long captains instead went week to week, but Terry was a multi-time week-to-week team captain. And once they got to the offseason or the postseason, that's when Dan would decide to go ahead and put captain's patches on players. Terry McLaurin, unsurprisingly, one of those players. A ton of effort put in this offseason to give Jayden Daniels more weapons to work with in his second season than he had in his first season. So you got to get the deal done with Terry McLaurin, right? You can't run the risk, not that there's necessarily a threat out there, at least publicly, that he's going to, skip training camp or hold out into training camp if a deal doesn't get done. But you do, if he misses the mandatory mini camp, you'd love to see him out there, obviously. But worst case scenario, you cannot let Terry miss, even a day of training camp. He's got to be out there for training camp, even though he's probably going to get a day or two here off in training camp. Still, you need him there to begin training camp on the right tip. Some surprises from the insider fan list. Mikey Sainristil already seen his top 10. Not really a surprise in the sense that I disagree necessarily, but just kind of rare to see a second-year player who's not a quarterback kind of come up there and have such a high standard or have such a high presence among the fan base. 3 offensive linemen, considering that offensive line is a major concern for this team and a big question mark for this team. A little bit surprised to see 3 O-linemen landing in the top 10. Of course, Laramie coming over, those votes are by reputation, of course. Sam Cosmi, obviously a big fan favorite, but Tyler Biadasz. I thought, honestly, when I put Tyler Biadasz on my top 10 players list, I kind of thought he might be one of those guys left off of the fan voted insider top 10 list, just because it's not a sexy position, right? But obviously, insiders putting some value into the brain power and the trickle down effect of what Biadasz does. I'm also a little bit surprised to see Marshawn Lattimore crack the top 10. Not that, he's not a talented guy, but he did have a little bit less of you can call it first year, right? It's not really first year, first half a year, I guess, with the Washington Commanders than some. Like there's a lot of noise out there about Commanders fans being a little bit unhappy with the Marshawn Lattimore trade right now. So I was a little bit surprised to see him crack the top 10 as well. And high profile names, again, like Marshawn, like Sam Cosmi, they do draw that star power, but there are some legitimate concerns there as well that I took into consideration when I crafted my top 10. So while the insider top 10 gives us a solid snapshot of who's earning respect from the Commanders roster, now it's time for me to share my personal top 10, where I weigh in with a few different takes and key reasons behind my choices. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wonder why your budget feels tight even when you're watching every dollar between game tickets, gear for the Washington Commanders, and trying to keep up with the latest roster moves? Expenses add up fast. That's where Monarch Money steps in, your personal CFO, helping you see exactly where your money is going. Monarch Money isn't just another budgeting app, though. It's a financial command center. Track your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So instead of just managing your cash flow, you can focus on building real wealth, maybe even saving up for the next Commanders jersey or game day experience, whatever you want. Here's what I love about Monarch Money. I discovered how much streaming sports content was costing me each month. Now I can budget that smarter, keep my priorities straight. Plus, Monarch makes managing money with my family easy. I can track shared expenses, set goals, and avoid those where did my money go moments that hit hard after big game day weekends. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Now that we've gone through the insider voted top 10, the fans have spoken. Here's my personal top 10 for the Washington Commanders in 2025 and why I made some different choices, including one key player on my list that did not make the insider list. I didn't really rank mine 1 through 10, to be quite honest with you, and neither did the fans. Just to be clear, Commanders fans, insiders did not rank 1 through 10 on their list. What they did is they just voted for 10 players, and then based on the percentage of votes that they got, that's where we got our 1 through 10, just to be 100% clear here. So my top 10 list is just 10 players. It's not in any general order, although Jayden Daniels, I think most of us would probably agree, is probably number 1 on that list. Cornerback Mikey Sainristil making my list, as well as did center Tyler Biadasz, linebacker Frankie Luvu, wide receiver Terry McLaurin, wide receiver Deebo Samuel, tackle Laramie Tunsil, tight end Zach Ertz, and linebacker Bobby Wagner. Those 9 players made the insider fan voted list, and they also made my personal list. So the player that was on my list that was not on the fan voted list, gonna be a little bit of surprise, especially for the insiders who listened and the everydayers who listened all through the offseason and all through the mock drafts and all that stuff. But it's running back Brian Robinson Jr. Listen, not a flashy pick, certainly, right? And you're talking about a running back that didn't rush for over 1,000 yards last season. And he's not going to be considered, a top 10 running back in the NFL. So how can I have him in the top 10 of this team? And to be fair, in the insider fan vote list, he didn't miss the top 10 by all that much. He did miss it, obviously, but he didn't miss by a whole lot either. But I think, listen, when you look at Brian Robinson Jr., and we've talked about this, like the player that he is, and we hear coaches talk about this all the time too. You got to scheme and lean into your player's strengths. Well, Brian Robinson Jr. is a running back that needs runway. He needs to get the ball. He needs to touch the ball, touch the grass. He needs to get some reps to really get going. But once he does, beautiful things can happen. We talked to a coach during the season last year, I told you about this, who acknowledged as much. So Brian Robinson Jr. needs multiple touches in the game to get going. But once he does, he's one of the better backs in the National Football League. So if you're the Washington Commanders and you want to get him going, you just have to understand that's what he's going to need. He's going to need that warm-up, right? When Brian Robinson had 15-plus carries, the team goes 7-1. When he rushes for 100-plus yards in a single game, 3-0. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. It doesn't happen, as much as you would want to, especially if B-Rob is on your fantasy football team. But when it does happen, good things tend to happen. Consistency and health are really the big questions. But that consistency, again, if he's a running back who needs those touches to get going, does that make him one of the best running backs in the NFL? No, but that's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is when Brian Robinson Jr. is used efficiently, is used properly by the coaching staff, by the game plan, he, I believe, is one of the top 10 players on the team. And when he's healthy, right? So the fully healthy, I think, is more impactful than the consistency, because obviously the health is going to impact the consistency. If you can't cut, if you can't drive because your leg is injured, things like that, that's going to impact the consistency of your play, right? So I put Brian Robinson Jr. on the list because why? He's healthy. He's healthy right now. We'll see how it goes once the season gets going. Is he going to finish a top 10 player on this list? I can't promise you that, but I'm telling you, just from a raw talent, raw potential standpoint, Brian Robinson Jr. absolutely makes the top 10 on my list. So 2 players that were on the fan voted list, insider list, that were not on my list, not necessarily players. Well, one player did kind of surprise me. We talked about that, but the player that didn't surprise me that made the list, but I have my reasons for not putting him on my list, is guard Sam Cosmi. And it's not because I don't like Sam. It's not because I don't think he's talented. It's because he tore his ACL. And it's because he tore his ACL in January. That is an injury that has a 9 to 12 month recovery period, pretty standard window of recovery. 9 months puts him at October 18th, right? And that's usually the minimum. And this is a big man. This is an offensive lineman. He relies on his knees. He relies on his lower body strength a lot more than some of these other players do. And so I just don't necessarily believe, not for anything other than just looking at norms and patterns and all that other. So it has nothing to do with Sam whatsoever. Like, if this was just about Sam and his determination and his willingness to work and do all the things he needs to do to come back to the team, I'd tell you he'd recover in 6 months. But there's only so much he can do, right? So because of that fact and the medical tendencies that come with that injury, I don't know that he's coming back before Thanksgiving. And if he doesn't come back before Thanksgiving, depending on how things are going for the team, I don't know that he doesn't just go on IR and stay there for the entirety of the year. Let him heal fully. Let him heal more than fully. Come back in 2026 with a vengeance and make this O-line even better. We'll see how it plays out. I would love to see Sam on the field. I would love to hear the fan reaction when Sam Cosmi runs on the field the first time, active for a game again. Like, that's going to be amazing. Whether it happens in 25 or 26, I think that's going to be an amazing moment. But I'm just, so that's why he's not on my list for 2025, because I'm not sure how much of him we're actually going to get in 2025. So not confirmed at all, but Dan Quinn did say he's hitting all the markers, quote unquote, right? So that's good. Good news there. No setbacks and all those things. The other player that didn't make my list, that did make the fan insider voted list, cornerback Marshawn Lattimore. And he was someone that I really did not expect to be on the insider list, just because so many Commanders fans, including a very good amount of the insiders, are just not very happy with the Marshawn Lattimore trade. There's a handful of insiders specifically that every time we talk about Marshawn Lattimore, and I sit here and I tell Commanders fans, as many of you that will listen to anything I have to say, as much as I tell you, listen, the trade last November was always about the future of that season, yes, but mostly 2025. I usually get pushback. I'm going to get pushback now because I'm very specifically mentioning the insiders that give me pushback. So they're going to give me pushback on this. So I was surprised to see that he was on the list, but he's got a Pro Bowl resume, right? So it makes sense. He's a Pro Bowl caliber cornerback, and the Washington Commanders have exactly one of those guys on this team right now. Obviously, there's potential here, right? Mikey certainly has potential. Trey, I mean, if you had OTA All Pros, Trey Amos might be an OTA All Pro. Jonathan Jones obviously has a good history as well, but he missed significant time in 2024. Marshawn did, both for the Saints and for the Washington Commanders after he got here. Hasn't been a full participant in OTAs because he hasn't been at OTAs. Now, again, that's not really a big surprise. If you know Marshawn, even as the little bit as I do, you really didn't expect him necessarily to be here, but I know a good amount of Commanders fans are not so happy that he's not here, feeling like, hey, dude, you need to come be a part of this organization, part of this culture, part of the brotherhood, come here and build these early bonds and all that stuff. And it's hard to argue with that. And certainly the Commanders would like for him to be here, especially given that he did struggle with the Washington Commanders last year. Give as much time as you can in the system, in the culture, and all that stuff. And look, at the end of the day, like, Trey Amos is taking maximum opportunity or maximum advantage of the opportunities with Marshawn not here. Jonathan Jones is out there getting some reps. Noah Igbenogany is out there getting outside reps, right? Like, other guys are getting reps. And the good news is, if Marshawn can return a Pro Bowl form for the Commanders this year, and then Trey Amos has a really solid rookie year, then you can kind of look back to now and say, well, if he gets more work because Marshawn's not here during this phase of the offseason, then it was all kind of worth it, right? So those personal picks highlight some clear overlaps, right? 9 players crossing over between both lists. The insider list ended up with 11 players, not 10, because they had a tie at the top 10. So 11 players on their list, 10 players on mine. I had 1 player that they didn't. They had 2 players that I didn't. But also, in the important differences are the reasons these differences had, what they mean for the Washington Commanders into 2025 and even beyond that. We're going to talk about all of that coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So now that we've compared the insider list and my personal top 10, let's dig into a little bit of the similarities and the differences, what they tell us about the Washington Commanders for 2025, but also a little bit into the future and who might make this list come 2026. A little bit of a preview of potential players that could land on this list next year. So again, 9-player overlaps signal that the fans and myself, obviously, we see things at least somewhat similarly, right? The insiders and I are pretty much in step with each other for the most part. I'm very curious, actually. I'm very interested to see what some of the reactions are to me having Brian Robinson on my list, and obviously the insiders not. And then also what, my leaving Sam Cosmi off the list. Again, it's nothing against Sam. I just don't know how much we're going to get of him. And it's hard to put a guy that you don't know is going to be on the field in the top 10. Just coming from a analytical, unbiased, unemotional standpoint, which is where I have to do my job from, right? So the differences, I think, come from weighing potential versus the current stats. I think that's really probably the most simplistic way to put this, right? As current statuses go, Marshon Lattimore, as much as it's kind of weird because this has put me in almost the reverse position of the conversation, right? I've been spending all this time telling fans who are very upset about the Lattimore trade or not happy with the Lattimore trade, hey, like, take it easy, calm down, let's see what happens this season. Training camp's important, all this other stuff. And now here we are with the roles reversed where he's on the fan top 10 and he's not on my top 10. So now I'm the one kind of being like, well, but the bottom line is we haven't seen Pro Bowl caliber Marshon Lattimore. So can I truthfully, honestly call him a top 10 commander before we see it? No. At the same time, did I put Laramie Tunsil on that list? I absolutely did, right? So, like, you know, it's not a perfect science, obviously, and there's certainly ways you can nitpick both lists. But I think that's kind of where we both all kind of stand. Like Marshon Lattimore, you know, if Laramie Tunsil comes out and struggles a little bit, would I put him on my mid-season top 10? Not that we're necessarily going to have one. That would be a different, you know, situation, different type of story. So it basically just boils down to where are you willing to give a little bit of credit and where are you not willing to give a little bit of credit, right? People want to put Sam Cosmi on the top 10 because when he's healthy, he's obviously one of the top 10 players on this team. I left him off my top 10 because right now he's not healthy. You could also say the same thing for Terry McLaurin. We haven't seen Terry McLaurin. 2025 Terry McLaurin, we've not seen him. So can we realistically put him on that list? I think, yeah, obviously we agree. I agree. You agree. At least the fans and the insiders that vote on this list, that you still put Terry McLaurin on that list. Even though we haven't seen 2025 Terry McLaurin, you still put 2025 Terry McLaurin on that list because that is, again, just how important he is, which again goes back to why everybody is so interested in what is happening with him and his contract. I'll tell you again, and we've talked about this back in 2022 when he wanted the new extension, the extension that he's currently playing on that expires at the end of this season. He skipped OTAs. He skipped mandatory minicamp, right? So we've seen this dance before. We've heard this tune before. Adam Peters is not shaken by it. I'm not worried about it, but I understand why everybody obviously wants to see the resolution come quicker. So do I. And I think that Terry, you know, does it well. I think if Terry were to make a public statement, he wants to sprint out onto that practice field and go out there and catch passes from Jayden and run routes next to Deebo Samuel and go challenge Trey Amos and make him better, right? Iron sharpening iron and all that stuff. I think that's absolutely where Terry wants to be, which is frustrating for him. But from an overall season perspective standpoint and everything potential, I'm not worried about Terry McLaurin, and I don't think the Commanders are either. When we zoom out to a league-wide level, right? So all of this, why did we do this top 10? Well, part of it is because there will be a Locked On NFL top 100 players in the league coming out soon. And for part of that, all NFL hosts have been asked to nominate our top 10 players, which will be the top 10 players that the insiders voted on. So Brian Robinson Jr. will not be nominated on this list. Sam Cosmi and Marshon Lattimore will, because that's the promise that I made to the insiders, right? So the Commanders are going to be represented well, but how many of them have a realistic opportunity to make the top 100? I think there's 4 names that could realistically make this top 100. I think Jayden Daniels, franchise quarterback, clear face of the team coming into year 2. I think he's got the opportunity to make the top 100. Terry McLaurin, consistent wide receiver 1, national recognition. Obviously, people are on board with that. I think he's got a chance. Bobby Wagner, future Hall of Famer, Hall of Famer walk-in, veteran linebacker, leadership, all that. So I think he's got a chance. And Laramie Tunsil. Laramie Tunsil, a little bit more reinforced that he'll make the top 100 because hosts of Locked On Texans try to list him as one of their top 10. I'm like, hold up, bro. Like, Laramie Tunsil don't play for the Texans no more. You don't get to put him on the Houston Texans top 10 in 2025. So I think Laramie Tunsil's got a good opportunity to make that top 100 as well. The rest of the players, look, the rest of the Commanders' top 10, they're not all going to make the list. They're still very, very strong talents. They're still developing guys. They're still maybe under the radar that could miss that top 100 consideration this year, but potentially, especially with all the primetime opportunities, especially with all the nationally televised game opportunities, could potentially make the top 100 next year. Who are the 3 Commanders that aren't on this year's top 10 for us that could be on that list next year? We've got 3 nominees. We're not going to dive too deep into them because it's all projection, right? But defensive lineman Javon Kinlaw, especially the way that these defensive coaches talk about him and how they're going to use him and everything else, I think he's got a chance. Dietrich Wise Jr., I think, has an opportunity to make that list. Cornerback Trey Amos, you got to put him on there. But also, how about defensive tackle Daron Payne. We've talked a lot about Daron Payne. I think I've written like 3 stories alone about Daron on WSA9.com on top of John Duran, who's written like 2 or 3 himself. Like a lot of Daron Payne is going out there. That's just on defense. Offensively, like could Luke McCaffrey take a step forward and become that guy? Can Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt not only surprise everybody's rookie year, but do so well that he's a 2026 top 10 commander? Ben Sinnott, is he going to get the opportunity? All that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of players who could potentially climb that ladder. But for today, that's going to do it on this episode of Locked On Commanders. Coming up next on Locked On Commanders, we're going to dive into a mandatory minicamp preview episode, including the players and battles we're watching over the 3-day Phase 3 culminating event. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, you can text them directly to me by becoming a Locked On Commanders Insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders, and you're going to get all kinds of bonus and good stuff from me that come outside the episode. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. You can find Locked On NFL Scouting for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this episode. Thanks as always for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. To all the everydayers, we see you, we appreciate you, and I thank you. Until next time, stay safe, be good to one another. We'll talk again very, very soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.